Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 119, Veteran Leadership Stories and Advice, Guy Wallace, Leroy Dennison, Kim Campbell, and Kevin McNulty. Here's a shout out to listeners in Styria, Austria, Morano, Brazil, Emilia Romagna, Italy, and in Morocco, the area of Tenga, Tutuan, Hosema. With that, let's get started. On this podcast, I've had a number of guests who have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. And when I say Armed Forces, I'm referring to military and law enforcement. Guests include Matt Crump, Jack Bucalo, Chris Ceballero, Gene Kanakoki, and Felix Nader. For this episode, I've selected segments from previous episodes, including the one with Guy Wallace, Leroy Dennison, Kim Campbell, and Kevin McNulty. Part 1, Guy W. Wallace, Your Mission and Fantail Watch. Guy served in the U.S. Navy. In this story, Guy talks about something he learned early on in his career. Here's Guy with his story.
Well, back in October of 1973, I was told, I just want you to be clear about your mission. So the backstory to that is that it was mid-morning, and I had just spent the past 2 days flying from Kansas City, Missouri, to San Francisco, California, to Anchorage, Alaska, to Tokyo, Japan, to the Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. And then I'd taken a long bus ride to Subic Bay, where I boarded my ship, the USS Okinawa, at 0200. So 2 o'clock in the morning for you landlubbers, where a yeoman from the ship's personnel office had to be woken up from his watch so he could find me a rack so I could catch some Z's, as we used to say back in the day. And then after less than 3 hours of sleep, because I had to get up for ship's muster and then spend a few minutes in the personnel office getting checked in, I'd come back from A school. I was in my working compartment as the ship got underway and we pulled away from Subic Bay and out to sea. A knock came on my workspace's locked door, and when I opened it, it was the XO, the executive officer, who poked his head in and looked at the 5 of us standing there and asked, "Which one of you is Wallace?" I said, "Sir, I am, sir." And he barked, "Follow me." And so I raced down the passageway trying to catch up to him and followed him to a set of ladders that we took downstairs to the hangar deck and across that to the ship's fantail, where he told the fantail watch, "Beat it, go take a smoke break." Now, I'd had stood the fantail watch before, and I knew that the consequences for abandoning that post could be quite severe.
Real quick, what is the fantail watch?
So the fantail is the back end, the stern of the ship, and there's this big opening window, if you will. And the fantail watch is there to watch for man overboard. Now, I was in the Navy in the mid-'70s, and so there weren't women on the ship at that time. So it was man overboard. And this is the last person who has an opportunity, a chance to see that somebody has fallen overboard or heard them screaming and yelling in the water or observed it happening or whatever. So it's a critical watch to be stood, and you just can't be what they call skylarking, stargazing, looking around. You've got to be ever vigilant, watching for that man overboard.
You're literally watching. Yeah.
You do not take your eyes off the ocean for your 2-hour watch. And actually it's a 4-hour watch, but somebody would come by and relieve you so you could take a rest break or whatever, on occasion, only if you arrange that with a friend and they'd stand in for you. But so we're steaming away from Subic Bay, and we're on a helicopter carrier. And, those kinds of accidents would occur during flight operations. This wasn't going on at the time, but, you could be blown over the side of the ship because of the cause of the rotors, and, or a helicopter landing and got too close to you and you backed away and, fell over the side, missed the cable netting on the side. But it had been impressed on me before I went away to school that when you stood that watch, you just had to, be ever vigilant, and you wouldn't have to you wouldn't want to have to explain at the captain's mast, why you didn't hear or see anything, especially in broad daylight, after the man overboard exercise was conducted, because, the ship would turn around, you'd go back for them, they'd launch boats, helicopters, everything to go, find somebody who had fallen overboard. And all the time, over the 1MC, the intercom system, the communication system on the ship would be saying, this is not a drill, this is not a drill, this is not a drill. We all took that kind of seriously, because, that could be us falling over the side of the ship. So I'm being taken to the Fantail watch area with the executive officer, the number 2 in command of the ship, just, after the captain. And he tells the watch to beat it and go take a smoke break. And, I felt bad for the guy, because I knew that he was hesitant in leaving. And the executive officer kind of gave him a stern look. And so he left. He went around the corner, and I could see his shoes, because he wasn't going to go too far from his watch post. This all heightened the
intensity.
For me, I was, what the heck? And I'm thinking, what the heck did I do? I've just been here, a few hours, what could I have done to be in trouble here? Why is he taking me to, Anyway, so I'm standing there at attention, and he says, at ease. And so I kind of, assumed a more relaxed posture. And, he was looking out over the water. He wasn't looking at me. He's looking out of the water, and I'm thinking he's doing the Fantail watch's job. Well, I guess that's cool, But anyway, so he says, he says to me while he's looking away from me, he says, I just want you to be clear about your mission.
Okay.
Sir, yes, sir, was my reply, and I'm standing there at ease. And he says, your mission is to keep the Marines from killing Marines, the Marines from killing sailors, and the sailors from killing sailors. And then I volunteered, and the sailors from killing Marines. And he turned to me and he barked, sailors don't kill Marines. So I immediately went back to at attention, knowing that I had just screwed up, to put it in civilian terms. And he got out a cigarette pack, took one out, tapped it, lit it, and blew smoke in my face. It was all rather dramatic. And I'm thinking, what the heck's going on here? But I knew, because of his barking at me, that I had screwed up. And he said, there have been murders on this ship's past 3 Westpacks. And a Westpac is a Western Pacific cruise. It's when you leave the States and you head off to the Western Pacific and South China Seas, blah, blah, blah. And he said, and the captain is damn sick and tired of writing parents, congressmen, and senators and his own chain of command about, how could this happen on a U.S. naval warship? Sir, yes, sir, I replied, still at attention.
So literally, this was true. This was something that actually happened and went out to sea, that someone might kill someone.
Yes, there's all sorts of reasons for it, but murders had happened on the 3 prior cruises, and so the executive officer, he's in charge of ship's morale, and I didn't really appreciate it, but I was working for him, 5 layers of chain of command between his role and my role on the ship. But so he asked me, so what kind of programming do you have? Well, I just got back from my A school at DINFOS, the Department of Defense Information School, where I graduated in both print and broadcast journalism. And my job was to go back and run the CCTV, closed circuit television system on board the ship, which is there to entertain everybody. So this is 1973 when I'm catching up back to my ship from school. And this is a new installation. They just put it in. They operated it in my absence till I caught up with the ship in the Philippines. But so I hadn't really had a chance to check out all my programming, but we had covered that kind of stuff in my schooling. So I said, I've got Masterpiece Theater and I've got college football games. And he stopped me. He held up his hand. He says, you're up in Marine country, where my closed circuit television studio was up in Marine country. What do Marines read? And my mind started racing. I can't say the wrong thing here because I've already, screwed up, faux pas. But and this is not a drill. The man's asking me, so what kind of program? So what do Marines read? It took me, it felt like minutes and minutes and minutes, but it was probably 10, 15 seconds. And I said, "Oh, sir, comic books, sir."
Ah, of course.
And he nods his head and he says, "Okay, again, what kind of programming do you have?" So then we talked about, the kinds of things that I had and, he told me, "I don't ever want to see a college football game on my television system. Everybody knows what the score was. These games are 9 months to 18 months old. All the officers are going to come and ask you to show the games of their alma maters because they're going to talk to other officers in the fleet, and they're going to know that that game is circulating. I don't ever want to see it on my system." And sir, yes, sir. And anyway, so because he was charged with ship's morale, I and the closed circuit television system were his tools to address morale issues, to keep people occupied after knocking off of work, going down and getting your chow, and then you go someplace on the ship and, spend your free time and try to stay out of trouble and try to stay out of fights and things like that.
If it wasn't football and if it wasn't Masterpiece, then what kind of programming did you have options for?
Well, we had All in the Family. And when I said that, he says that, so we had a couple other programs. And I don't remember all the details of that, but I had cartoons and I had, silly kind of programming, black and white films, older films, and some newer programming. But that television show, All in the Family, that was a huge hit. And so, that was my job. My job was to help keep ship's morale up and entertain the troops. 600 sailors, 2,400 Marines, a little city, and my captive audience.
Yeah, what kind of effect did that have? That type of programming have? How did it result?
I did a 5-minute newscast every day at 1800, 6 o'clock, again, for you landlubbers, or non-military types. Did a 5-minute newscast, read the news. I'd go up to Radio Central and grab they'd collect the news for me. And I'd read, the API stuff and all the other news sources that they collected. And so I would pick stories and read 5 minutes worth of news, no more, no less, and then boom, right into programming. And we didn't stop for commercials. I had a whole bunch of commercials that the U.S. Navy had provided to me, but people would whine and crab at me when I showed those, so I quit showing them. I just ran it straight on, and we'd run from 6 o'clock at night till 1 or 2 in the morning and show the programming and keep people, occupied, busy. Taking my programming to the next ship or bringing programming to my ship was not a priority. U.S. mail was a priority. My programming was not. You did what you had to do to entertain everybody. And then I get requests for re-showing something because somebody stood a 4-hour watch and they missed a particular program and they heard all about it and they wanted to see it again. So I'd show it for them, and then I'd take the abuse from everybody else because everybody knew my face because I did that 5 minutes of newscast every night. And, so I couldn't go anywhere without, hearing good or bad feedback from, my captive audience.
Yep, your programming and the role you had may not have had a high priority compared to the U.S. Postal Service delivering mail to the crew. When I hear the comment, "Are you clear on your mission?" For me, that's a way of calibrating or recalibrating your crucial role that you bring to your ship. In the heat of the moment, there's a tendency just to react. But when you revisit your guiding principles, your purpose, that enables us to respond more thoughtfully rather than just simply react. That's what I get from being clear about your mission, that statement.
Oh, yes. And me being clear about my mission got me in big trouble one time. The officers have a mess, which is their little, eating area and dining room area. And the chiefs have their mess. And the chiefs, for some reason, didn't like me.
Okay.
So they sent me a note one night and said, from the chief's mess and signed by my chief in the chain of command that I was to shut down all the television programming at 10 o'clock at night. So
that'll go over well.
I'm staring at this note, and I've got friends. I have an air-conditioned space in the South China Sea where it's hot and humid. So my friends would congregate in my workspace, and I let them run it. They knew how to run the thing. But I took this note that I had gotten from the chief's mess because it had been delivered by somebody. I can't remember. I broke 5 levels of chain of command when I walked down to the executive officer's compartment, knocked on his door, and handed him this note. And he read it, and he said, "Oh, I'll take care of this, but you're in a world of trouble." and so the next day I had to go talk to the petty officer in charge of my group. I then talked to the chief. I talked to the division officer. I talked to the department head. And then I talked to the executive officer, who said, "Wasn't that fun?" And because I had said, this is contrary to the mission I had been given, because I'm pretty darn sure, sir, which is what I said to everybody that wasn't a petty officer. And as I had to go the rounds the next day, I'm pretty sure all those murders happened after 10 o'clock at night. That may have been true, but still, you just don't go break the chain of command. And what I should have done is shut the system down and then gone from there. But, I was too into, this is my job. I'm keeping people entertained, and, they shouldn't do this. And so I got in trouble. But you
were clear about your mission.
I was, and everybody else was not. It was between the executive officer and myself. And if only he had clued everybody else in, then I would have probably been. I still wouldn't have been okay, because I still broke, the chain of command, and that's a no-no. So I understand that.
Part 2: Leroy Dennison, valuing connections and relationships at all levels. Leroy served in the Coast Guard, and in this story he shares an experience he had where he received a phone call early in the morning. Here's Leroy to explain.
Back to my life in the Coast Guard, at the Coast Guard Training Center in Yorktown, Virginia. It's the largest training center in the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard is small altogether right now. Even today, there's like 43,000 active duty officer and enlisted people in the entire Coast Guard. New York City's got a bigger police department. So the Coast Guard has a very effective training organization. The objective of the training, whether it's advanced training for someone who's been doing their job for a long time, or junior people who are coming in that are picking up a specialty, it's job performance. There's no compliance training. There's no HR training. It's how to do something. It's job task analysis driven. So the commanding officer at the base, we had about 600 military personnel, about 400 civilians in the organization. All the military people that are there, for the most part, the ones involved in training, they're handpicked. They're there because they're extremely good at what they do. They have other attributes that would probably transition into being a very effective instructor. Coast Guard, like other branches of the military, has decided that subject matter experts make the best instructors for how to do something technical. It's easier to teach somebody how to be an effective instructor than it is to take an instructor and try and teach them a little bit about the topic that they're talking about.
Yeah.
So anyway, the commanding officer there, he was an 06, that's a captain in the Coast Guard or the Navy, or it'd be a full colonel in the Army, Air Force, or Marine Corps. The morning that I advanced to E9, which is high as you can go enlisted, he knew enough about my schedule to know that I'd be in at the office at 6 o'clock in the morning. About 1 after 6, my phone rang, and it was Captain Pluta, who ended up retiring as an admiral, by the way. He was congratulating me on my advancement, asked me a question about my wife. We shot the breeze for a few minutes and hung up. I was impressed that the guy, he was personable enough to, call me up and tell me, "You done good," and I'm recognizing that.
Sure.
I got along with the man extremely well anyway. It didn't really surprise me, but the fact that he got up in the morning at 6 o'clock when he didn't have to be at work until 8, just to call me, I thought, man, that's pretty cool. Well, that day at lunch, training center, we shut down for an hour and a half so people could take care of wellness. They could go out and run. ride a bicycle. We had intramural volleyball league. A young guy that was on my team, talking to him, found out he advanced it from E2 to E3 that day. The next phone call that Captain Pluta made was to him, and knew that this kid who's like 19 years old was in at work at 5 after 6, called him up and congratulated him for his advancement. And then he asked him a question about his girlfriend who had recently broken an arm or a leg or something, that personal aspect of this young man's life, and asked him a question about it. That really impressed me, that he reached out to people to make that personal connection, saying, here, he's the top dog in the organization. And if you're an E2 at the training center, he was about as junior as you can get. We didn't have any E1s. For him to call this kid up and tell him congratulations, and then ask him, how's Kathy? It was like, when I found out he did that, that impressed me more than the fact that he called me.
Yeah, that really says something about how someone in his position, a commanding officer, values the people that report up to him. There's a leadership principle called connect with others. And this is just an incredible way of building trust, just having someone just really appreciate and feel valued in an organization.
Yeah. He was one of the best commanding officers I had in my 22 years in the Coast Guard. He was, at the time, the Coast Guard was embracing total quality management, Deming's quality action team things, continuous process improvement. And he was a firm believer that the people in the best position to fix a process that isn't as effective as it could be for those involved in the process, not the people further up in the chain of command saying, you got to do better. We had several QATs, quality action teams, where people were selected to be on it based upon what they did, not how much money they got paid, not how senior they were, what was their job. We selected people to be on a QAT based on those who could identify the low-hanging fruit, fix this right here, and then take another measurement and see how much better it is, and then go do this second step. Captain Pluta was really good about turning things over to QATs, not interfering. And when the team reported out, he would implement their suggestions. No questions asked. He would try it. And the thing about the QATs and total quality management, when the Coast Guard was doing this, is you don't make a whole bunch of changes to a process. You make one change. You measure, was it effective? If it was not, you undo that change. If it was, great. Okay, now let's implement the next recommendation. So it was the incremental, make one change, do a measurement. Are things better? If they are, continue. It was gratifying to have someone in charge that took that attitude. He trusted his people.
There's something to be said about someone in a management position recognizing that the people doing the work know the work the best, rather than make assumptions or try to impose a belief about what the work is like, really relying on the people doing the work to be part of a QAT.
Yeah.
And that makes sense.
The military, just like, or not unlike large corporations, those at the senior level, C level, they don't really know what's going on down at where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah. And
people who are reporting up the chain of command, they're very good about reporting stuff that's good, but they're real hesitant to report problems. So quite often, the higher up you get in the chain of command, people are oblivious to problems that are really easy to change. It's a policy change. If there's a requirement to do stuff, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. Step 2 involves one person. And if that person is out or sick or whatever, everything stops. It's kind of like the barge in the Suez Canal. If you got something plugging up the works, well, you need to fix that. But oftentimes people at the top of the pyramid, they don't know what's plugging up the works.
I think that's a good example of what you just described. And there's an organization in which you have especially with a strong chain of command, the good stories, like you're saying, tend to float up. And the trouble, they tend to stay with the people that have to do the work. So that makes a lot of sense. And I can appreciate the captain's trust in the employee, not employees, but in
Subordinates.
Yeah, subordinates. Part 3, Kim Campbell on connecting and being human. Kim Campbell served in the Air Force and retired just this year. She shares a story about taking command of a squadron, the ceremony that happened, and shares a conversation that happened afterwards. Here's Kim with her story.
One of my very first opportunities to lead was when I took command of a squadron in the Air Force. And a squadron is about 150 people. So this was my first real opportunity to lead a larger organization. And one of the very first things that happens when you take command of a squadron is you do a big formal change of command ceremony. People come in from all over the base. They come in, family and friends will fly in. My squadron itself was standing in formation. We were in a big hangar out on the airfield. It was a big formal event. My husband and my 3-year-old son were sitting in the front row. The ceremony started, and there's speeches and a lot of things that go to it, so it takes a while. And I could tell by looking at my 3-year-old son, about 15 minutes into the ceremony, he was just bored out of his mind. My new boss, the group commander, is talking about the importance of leadership and having a good leader in an organization. And I look down at my son, and he kind of gives me this little smile. And then he hops up out of his seat and takes a few steps towards me. I'm getting nervous. I'm looking at my husband, and he's looking at me like, what are we going to do? And my husband is just thinking, well, if I get up to get my 3-year-old son, that he's going to have a full-blown temper tantrum right here in front of us. And I'm, of course, thinking that he has to do something because this is a big formal ceremony and I'm about to take command of this 150-person squadron. And my son doesn't care about any of this.
Of course.
He takes a few more steps and the ceremony is going on. And now I can barely concentrate. I mean, I'm just watching my son, wondering what he's going to do. Finally, he is next to the stage. And I think he might just sit down and stay there. But no, he takes a few more steps and ends up right on the stage. And then the next thing you know, he is sitting in my lap at this big formal ceremony. You know, I love my son, obviously, and it's very cute to have him in my lap, but not at this moment. You know, I'm honestly really nervous about what my airmen, my team is thinking of me. I'm worried that they're going to, look at me like I can't even control my 3-year-old son. How am I going to lead this squadron? It was hard for me to kind of show this human side of leadership, to let them see me for who I was. You know, I was a mom, I was a wife, a fighter pilot, and a leader. It was hard for me to let them see me for that. But the next day, after I kind of went and walked around to talk to people in my squadron, we were kind of joking about it. And, I was a little bit embarrassed about what had happened. One of my young airmen looked at me and said, "Ma'am, it's okay. It makes you human." And I was like, that's exactly it. There's this human side to leadership, to let people see you for who you are and, to let them know I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers. I can't always control my 3-year-old son. But that comment from someone younger than me, more junior than me, really helped me set the stage for leading that unit and for leadership really through the rest of my career in the Air Force, because she showed me that connecting with your team on a human level is really important and it can really pay off. I loved hearing that. And I loved learning from one of my airmen. That airman taught me more about leadership than probably I've read in books just by that one comment.
In the corporate world, when someone moves from being an individual contributor to a supervisory position, there's this lack of training of what leadership is in a lot of organizations. And when you go by your intuition, your gut feeling, you want to show that you're an expert, you're in charge. And it's the antithesis of showing that you're human.
Yeah.
I can imagine for a squadron moving up into a position like that, having your son come up to the stage and sit there. I could visualize you're trying to keep your composure. You're trying to show that you're an officer. This is something you're ready for. But the human side comes out. That, ironically, is something that newer people don't realize is probably some of the most important quintessential parts of leadership.
Absolutely. I mean, I came into that squadron as this combat proven fighter pilot. I had these ideas about leadership, who I should be and how I should perform. And it was like, just by saying it makes you human, it's okay. And the connection that I felt with that, it just recaged me into what was really important. And it was just being able to connect with people and to understand what they're going through and, their strengths, their weaknesses, what they're struggling with. I think that connection is so important in leadership. And I think a lot of times it takes the leader to jump in first, to be vulnerable, to open themselves up, to see that human side. But you're right, it's not something that we are normally taught. It's not in the normal classes and literature about the traditional, I would say, literature about leadership.
When you're a person with authority, when you can show the human side, it makes it not only easier to lead, but more fun or funner.
Absolutely. It was, yes, in every way. I loved connecting with my airmen and getting to know them. And yes, there is still a leader-follower role, but I really enjoyed the moments of getting out and walking around and learning about them and them showing me what they do. That was the best part about my job. It was my favorite part about being a leader.
Part 4, Kevin McNulty on taking care of your people. Kevin served in the Army, and he shares some advice that he learned early in life. Here's Kevin.
Gary, when you first asked me about a memorable time with a leader, it actually made me think of something that I encountered when I was working for you at Ceridian. You used to have a whiteboard up in your cube on the wall. Written on that whiteboard, kind of off to the side and circled, was the phrase, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast."
I remember that.
That has always stuck with me. It immediately clicked for me that I had seen that happen time and time again at other companies I had worked for, and I saw it happen there as well. It immediately clicked for me. I had never thought about it in that context before, but that just struck me as, well, that's what's happening. And I've kept that with me ever since. And, the couple places that I worked after that saw it illustrated again. And so it's something that I've really tried to keep always kind of right at the surface layer of my subconscious as we created NetWeave. And as my partner and I have built the organization, I've always tried to think of what kind of culture are we creating, because we can have the best plan in the world for getting to our goals, but if our culture doesn't support that, it'll never work.
My thanks to my guests. If you'd like to learn more about them, go to the show notes. And if you have a question or comment, go to unlabelleadership.com, click the message icon, and leave a voicemail message for up to 1 minute. I'd like to thank those who contribute to the show. Your contributions makes a difference because this is an all-volunteer service. I'd like to thank you for listening. This is Gary DePaul. Until next time, lead on.